Hey friends, you're back on the Faculty Factory podcast, and I'm Kim Skarupski here at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas, looking at my new friend, Dr. Neil Duggar. Hi, Neil.
Hello, glad to be here.
Dr. Neil Duggar. So who is Dr. Duggar? He is an associate professor and the director of medical physics in the Department of Radiation Oncology at the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, Mississippi. So again, welcome, Neil. So glad you're on the podcast. And how did Neil get here? Just a way you can get here. He went to the facultyfactory.org website, been listening to podcasts for a while, had an idea, reached out at facultyfactorykim@gmail.com. Anyway, just go to the website and you can email me. And he has a topic today he's going to share with us. We're going to have a really interesting conversation. Apparently, one can lead without having an official fancy pants title, which I find so hard to believe. I can't possibly imagine any of us leading without authority, but Neil says we can do it. So let's learn how. Thanks, Neil, for being here. Let's get into it.
I just want to say that I definitely don't claim to be an expert on this. I am a fellow traveler in this topic, and honestly, I just think that this is such like. Well, I'm not an expert. I just care an awful lot about it. I'm very passionate about this topic because I feel like it applies to most of us. Most of us don't have authority. Most of us don't have a title, for most of our careers, even if we ever do get one. And so, really learning to lead without authority can be such a powerful skill, or combination of skills. I guess what I would start with is that ultimately, when you don't have authority, is really the best time to be working on your overall leadership skills. Because once you get authority, it becomes this easy button or this hammer that you might could swing around to cut corners. And you might even leave damage in your wake if you don't use some of these important skills to get things accomplished rather than just using your authority to make things happen. It's not that you can't use authority, but there might be some skills that will help you do it in a way that is healthy long term. And also, the other thing about it is once you get authority, a lot of people that I've talked to, and even myself included, once you get some authority, you feel like you got to play catch up. You feel like, oh my gosh, I suddenly need to be good at all of these things, such as having difficult conversations or paying attention to others to figure out how to be their ally. Like you may not have been good at that as somebody without authority, but now once you have authority, you want to be good at those things and you're not yet, but when you don't have authority and you want to lead, you have to be good at those things. You have to learn how to actually do those things on a fundamental level. And so really when you don't have authority is the best time to be working on your leadership skills.
Hey, sorry, it's Neil. Could you just pause here? Define authority for us. There's, formal authority, informal authority. So when you're talking about when we don't have authority, paint us a picture of someone, we have faculty members, we have listeners, we have learners around the world listening to this right now. What do you mean when we don't have authority? What kinds of authority are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I think of the word authority in this topic, I'm basically talking about you sort of have some level of control over other people's destiny, essentially. You can make decisions about their future, whether it's how things are organized in their workplace, or maybe even how much they're compensated, or whether or not they're even a part of your organization at all. So like once you and it may be a title or it may be, some basically the organization has deemed you as a decision maker.
Hmm.
So once you're a decision maker, you have some level of authority and people are going to naturally respect you and maybe even somewhat fear you because they know you hold them, their future in your hands. So that's kind of what I mean by authority.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has definitely been a topic that I've been interested in for a long time because, I've been a medical physicist now for almost 14 years. And most of that time has really been when I didn't have any real authority. I was not a decision maker overall. And I was interested in leading. I was interested in helping make good change and positive change for my department, for my hospital, for the field. I didn't really have direct ability to do that. And so I got in, I started just diving into a bunch of different leadership sources and listen, I listen to podcasts like crazy, including yours, Kim, and just trying to grab as many nuggets as I can, especially when I feel like it's something that can be worked on when you don't have authority. I really try to write that down and stick with it. And some of it I have really become part of who I see myself, who I am. Like it's not just something that I do, it's really part of who I am. And that's how I sort of ingested it. And so I would love to share
Mhm.
some of those nuggets with you and your
Yeah.
audience.
Look, all right. I hate to be annoying, but I want to back up a little bit because you said something that kind of made me go, I was interested
Okay.
in leading. You said I was interested
Mm.
in leading. And I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because it sounds like you just now mentioned who I am. Maybe one of your values is, leading and having vision. But can you take us back to where you knew or how you knew that you were interested in leading? And I ask that because I think there's some people, some faculty members, early career, maybe even mid-career, who look at so-called, I'm doing air quotes, leaders, department directors, chairs, deans, provosts, presidents, CFOs, COOs, da 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 da, and go, oh, heck no, I would never want to do that. So, could you just kind of tell us a little bit more before you get into the juicy nuggets? How did you know that you or why or all the stuff interested in leading? What does that mean to you?
Sure. I think that's a great question too, because when I say leading, I do not mean my goal is to one day become this CEO or CFO or chief medical officer. That is not what I'm interested in. Now, if if that if me moving into a role like that is the best thing for the organization or for us to for us to take care of our patients, just like I was offered my role as a director of physics. Honestly, we had a vacancy, of course, and we needed somebody who cared and we needed somebody who was capable. And so I wasn't 100% sure that I was capable, but I knew that I cared, and so I felt like that was the best to try to do what I could for my patients. To go back a little bit, so when I say leading, I don't mean, like having a specific position or getting to a certain level. What I mean is I saw that there was change needed. I saw the areas where there could be improvement, and I just wanted to be part of the solution. I just wanted to see positive change. And so when I say leading, that's really all I mean is I wanted to be somebody who helped bring about positive change for the organization and for the patients that we take care of. So
Amen, amen, Neil. So that made my heart grow so big. I love when I hear people say they're not glory hogs. They're not
mhm.
coming to me going, I want to be a leader. And I'll say, well, what kind of leader? And they'll start naming off titles. And then I'll say, really, what else or why? They said, just because I just need to get that title versus what you've described as a true characteristic, a character, your value of opportunity, looking to make things better. Just even incremental, something where there's something that could be improved. I'm there. And I really appreciate how you said something wanted somebody who cared and was capable. Gosh, that's a humble way of thinking about leadership, but it's looking for need. Where are we needed in any facet? So thank you for underscoring to me what is true leadership as someone who wants to make things better. All right, let's hear those nuggets, Neil.
Sure, sure. I really have to start with this area, and that's the idea that when you start leading, really the first place you should start is with yourself. You're not necessarily going to have a bunch of people lining up. I mean, in elementary school, you take turns being the line leader, but that's not necessarily reality in, professional situations. But you have to start with yourself. One of the most pivotal things for me that I experienced is the process of understanding my why, process of understanding my purpose. Who am I? What am I going to be about every day? And that's going to help dictate to me what success looks like and whether or not I am making progress. And so I heard this from a lot of different sources. In fact, this has come up at least 3 times in the last few months on your podcast. But people talk about it all the time, like Simon Sinek, this is a big thing for him. Um, I've heard it, and it hit me really powerful. I was listening to a podcast from a man named Craig Groeschel, who's a pastor of it, who's, really, he's interesting because he, as a pastor, yeah, you have authority, but you also have to influence people because a religious organization is really a volunteer. They're all volunteers. He actually took it a step further, and I took his advice, and I not only thought about what my why was, but I've actually written it down. I actually have about a paragraph or two, and I have written it down, and I even recorded myself reading it. I will regularly return to that and read it or listen to it, even if I'm driving or whatever. If I'm feeling discouraged or feeling frustrated, or even if I just feel like it, I haven't circled back, I'll listen to it. And the other thing that I do that I did with it is it doesn't just have to be your professional role. It can be who you are across the board. Um, my why captures who I am from a religious standpoint. It captures who I am as a husband and a father, but also as a medical physicist. And it motivates me, and it's honestly, it's been a little bit cheesy. It's a little cheesy, but it's powerful to me. And so I just think that, like it'd be easy to sit there and be like, okay, I got to know my why or whatever, but I would recommend taking it serious, writing it down, and let it be your guiding star. Because honestly, I mean, the reason I got so serious about it is I had an experience at work where I was incredibly demotivated. And, I got basically a combination of factors. One, I found out one of my leaders, somebody with authority, was not motivated in the same way I was. That we were not on the same page and we were not headed in the same direction. And so that was a challenge. And the process of figuring that out was not fun. Then I also got some difficult feedback from my direct supervisor about an area where I needed improvement, which was an area that I would never have guessed that I needed improvement. And, taking that, like responding to that required me to circle back and say, okay, who am I? And what am I going to, and so then basically it gave me a foundation to stand on so that I could then start from there and make progress. It also gave me resiliency so that when I run into demotivating experiences like that, that threaten to discourage me or frustrate me or whatever, like I'll be able to overcome that because I can always go back to my why, and I know, and overcome that. So,
Wow, knowing yourself, that mission-centric, purposeful living. I'm curious if your why has changed because you described it to us as being a husband, a father, active in your community, involved in your faith, and the last thing you said was a medical physicist. So I'm
mhm.
I'm curious if how often you would recommend reviewing that. Is it fundamental? Does it change? Does like when you got that kind of tough feedback, did it give you pause to like, gosh, am I, being real about this? I mean, has my why now changed? What would you advise someone who like would go through this exercise?
Now I think there's a lot of strategies you could use to try to come up with your statement. For me, I tried to stay more or less general and pick things to include in that statement that I believed were, long standing. These were roles I was going to have for a long time. Now it's not to say that they couldn't change, but also I wanted to pick things that I felt like were stable enough that, like for example, I wouldn't necessarily, I didn't specifically, have a title in there or a specific role at work or anything like that. Like it was really my general position as a medical physicist and what I try to, how I'm actually trying to make each day better for my patients, and so, that idea, like that's something that can stick with me, and it also can look a lot of different ways practically. So it's not
A
like a
plan.
roadmap. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a plan or a roadmap. It's something that's sort of generic, but also stable that, it's, like I said, it's a foundation. And so it's now it could change. I think it could change, obviously when I get to preferment or retirement or whatever, I don't know that it will, some of that might change. Obviously, I'll have grandkids then, hopefully, maybe stuff like that. But I try to pick things that really are core or central to who I am every day and why I'm making my decisions, and try to stay away from the specifics, because I'm trying to, like, my goal was to make it where success could look a lot of different ways because, or, and really ultimately for me, my why helps any level of progress helps me see, so whether it's an inch of progress or a mile of progress, I can say, okay, today I made I did something for my, for my, but, and it can look a lot of different ways. It could be from a research, and like I don't get into specifics of research. I don't get into specifics of clinical work. It's very, very generic, but it's also specific about core elements of me,
Oh
so
gosh, I love that, Dr. Duggar, that an inch or a mile, but as long as at the end of the day there was some movement.
yeah.
So my career mantra, my whole life, I learned just only maybe 15, maybe 12 years ago, that is to build community. My mission, my mantra is just three words: to build community. And so I realized, someone told me, "Oh, you're a community builder." And I'm like, "I'm a what?" So I learned, I'm like, yeah, everything I do, I feel that I'm achieving my goal, my purpose in life when I'm building community, when I'm bringing people together in my leadership programs and through scholarship, through a podcast, through books, whatever it is. So I hear you saying that at the end of the day, I feel good when I have been in community with people. That is,
Mhm.
and it's not so specific like this paper, this grant, this book, this podcast episode, not real like individual career development planning or goals and strategies. It's this general foundational. I like how you put that, a foundation of who am I, my why. I think it's great. Thank you so much. Starting with self.
Sure.
That's great. What's another nugget?
Okay, so another one that is important is to learn to be an ally. So, and there's a lot that gets rolled into that statement because if you're going to be an ally to the people around you, you got to learn to pay attention to them. It's very easy for all of us, and including I'm definitely introverted by nature. I prefer to be behind the scenes. I prefer to be, kind of head down, get my work done. But I've learned the value of pretending to be an extrovert at times, I guess. But ultimately you got to pay attention to people around you. And if you can kind of get a sense of what success looks like for them or what are the challenges that they're running into, and you find ways to, it's not like you have to go take over their what they're doing or whatever. But if you figure out, what, if I do my job, if I make one small change to the way I'm doing my job, then I can make their life a little bit easier. For example, some very small example, um, I found out one day that one of our billing people, that if a specific date, which was automatically populated in this code that I send out when I do some of my work, if it stays in there, it causes them to have to fix it later. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to learn to just pay attention and delete that date out every time I build that code so that they don't have to fix it later. Like that's just such a small, like it's just me realize, oh wait, that affects their life. Well, now I can just make that small change to when the way I'm doing my practice, and I can make their life just an incremental bit easier, but like that's just one example. I mean, and of course there's bigger ways, like obviously, if you find out about a personal struggle of one of your colleagues, you can be a listening ear, you can be a supportive figure, especially if you're friends with that person. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can be an ally, but sometimes it's just trying to have an awareness of how you're impacting others, and do your thing in a way that's not, definitely not, negative towards them, but also maybe you could help them make progress in their goals and in their, especially like another way is, I'm a big believer. I mean, this is another nugget later, but I'm a big believer in credit being infinitely divisible, and so like I try to, you know keep myself, like, try not to toot my own horn if I can help it. Of course, pride is a struggle for everybody, um, but in I believe that there are people out there that will toot your horn for you. And so one way you can be an ally is to toot other people's horn. Like when you see somebody who's doing a good job and you have the opportunity, like maybe you've got an audience with somebody, at a higher level with authority or whatever, you can like if an opportunity comes up to toot their horn, toot their horn. And that you can be an ally to them, and, honestly, that can help you with your goals too, because if they're really good and they get credit and maybe one day they move to a higher level of authority and they're doing a good job there, well, they can make your life easier from there, So
Yeah.
so anyway, I mean, I just think there's a lot of important ways to be an ally. And, we could probably spend a whole podcast talking about all the ways
Yeah.
to be an ally to others.
Neil, of course I love that of looking for ways and paying attention, as you put it so easily. I mean, it's simply pay attention, and that's so difficult in this ecosystem where we work because we're so busy, multiple competing demands, all these complexities of what's happening in the landscape. It's difficult to purposely pay attention to people, to notice things, to say, yes, it's going to take away from, and that is an investment in relationships that will pay off with compound interest. And it feels better. So there's so many reasons to do that to people who we work with who may be looking to us as bosses or superiors. And as you were describing, I'm thinking I could do the same thing and we can be allies to our bosses. So not only looking for ways to lift up and amplify those around us and say, hey, before we start this meeting, did you all see Neil's paper? Or did he see the way he interacted with that difficult case over there? That's great. And also looking for ways to support our bosses and making our bosses look good and demonstrating that, no, we've got you. We're we get the vision, we're on the bus with you, we're with you. That followership is speaks volumes to we're stronger in numbers. So I think that practice, what you're saying, this skill of being an ally, it's intentional. It's a leadership competency that we have to, if we want to make an impact and a difference, formally or informally, that requires us to think about it in all across the whole continuum, you know.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And and it translates, because once you have authority, you're going to be responsible for doing evaluations and things like that. And what's difficult about that, right? You have to sit there and remember all the things that this person has done well or not done so well. But if you're paying attention and you're watching people and seeing their growth areas, but also seeing where they're really kicking butt, then you can remember that you already got that skill of paying attention, so.
Love it. Great one, Neil.
Yeah. So another area that I think is 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 challenging, but also important when you don't have authority, is learning to see the big picture.
Ooh,
Because when you don't have authority and you're not responsible for a whole group, a lot of times it's very easy to only see the obstacles in your path, and only to see how your challenges. and not really understand what's going on with other areas of your department or other workers around you, or even the challenges that your boss is facing, the pressure being put on them by the vice chancellor or whatever, like and what are the goals for the department. And so you may be, if you're trying to only work on your problems, which are important, it's not that your problems aren't important, but if you're always complaining about the challenges you face or always pushing against, you may not necessarily be contributing to the success of the group. And so if you learn to take a step back and say, okay, well, maybe I can put up with this process being a little less efficient for me if it means it frees up space for us to deal with this other challenge that affects a lot more of us, or that is holding our whole department back or whatever. So like, and when you learn, honestly, when you learn to see the big picture, a lot of times when your bosses figure that out, that you are somebody who sees the big picture, they'll be interested in your feedback, and so even without authority, you may be able to borrow some of theirs because you can give them feedback that might lead to some of the change that you're hoping to see. But if you don't see the big picture, a lot of times your complaints just get filed away on the side, that, they're not necessarily relevant to the overall mission. Yeah.
Ooh, Dr. Duggar, another
So,
great one because you're helping me remember a conversation I had recently with my book co-author, the greatest coach alive, Miss Heather Broad. We were talking about main character, like this issue of the malady of the main character syndrome, and it's the opposite of, not really an opposite of the imposter phenomenon, what used to be called, or imposter syndrome and imposter phenomena. But this main character malady is when we tend to think that we're our main character in our own movie. And we assume people will, surely you remember, Neil, we just met last month and I told you about A, B, C, and D. And certainly you're aware that these are important things for me, assuming that we're also a main character in other people's life stories, that each one of us is the main character in our own life stories. So we forget that, or we fail to see, as you pointed out, that, gosh, my priorities, Kim's priorities, they're really big and I can make a really good case for why they're important. But gee whiz, if I put myself up a bunch of different levels, all of a sudden my priorities compared to, the financial, stability of an institution, maybe not so important. So that vision, that understanding, that discernment to be able to recognize um, where we are in this complex, multi-layered, hierarchical places where we work is a challenge, and it's a maturity, I think, that we need to, or we should recognize priorities, and having a little bit of, back to the word, humility, to be yes, this is important, and where does it fit in the other, my boss's priorities, and also being able to recognize I am probably not aware of all the things that are going on up there. So I
yeah.
have to be open to the fact that there's, I'm not the keeper of all wisdom, or nobody is. So there's a certain element of having to be patient and prudent. So that to me is such an important one, that's learning to see the big picture and asking curious questions to try to understand why things are the way they are.
So you've mentioned humility several times, and it is so important. And it is I don't know about for everybody, but for me, it is so easy to jump into pride and be proud, and it's not that that's necessarily bad. It's just that when that becomes the main voice that you're hearing, it can lead to negative effects, such as, like, I have one, just a this is just a quick nugget, but I've got a statement of beware of your own legend. You can sort of start believing that your feedback is the most important, your opinion is the most important, and so maybe you have done great things, but the reality is there will always be voices that you need to be listening to outside of your own.
Wow.
Um,
Mm.
yeah. And on that note, like humility leads to so many good things. So for example, not taking things personally. Sometimes people do stuff and okay, maybe they had negative intent, but a lot of times they didn't. And so I think it's if humility can allow you to assume positive intent. And so that way, when people does something that maybe they leave your name off of a journal paper or something like that, and you actually contributed, right? Well, obviously that's not fair, but they didn't necessarily mean to do that. They may not have been aware of the big picture. They may have just been involved in a part of it, and not realized who all the authors were or something like that, and so you can assume positive intent that they didn't intentionally leave you off of that paper or, whatever other, like, people are generally not trying to be, it's a very small percentage of the time that people are actually trying to hurt others, and so, if you can assume positive intent, which takes humility, don't take it personal. Like, I actually listened to a TED talk from a guy who became a referee because he wanted to learn not to take things personally. So,
Wow. Wow. That
uh,
is a glutton for punishment, huh?
I know. But the reality is those people just care about their team or they care about their player or whatever. And they're not really they just want their team to do well. They want their player to do well. And so he learned to take that he doesn't have to take it personally as far as a personal attack.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's gosh,
yeah.
I remember talking to somebody and was trying to understand, like, I just need to practice this. How can I go to some kind of camp or something where someone just screams and yells at me all weekend and I can learn to be like chill? They're like, that's cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm like, well, can I do that? Can somebody do that to me? I think a lot of us in academic health, we criticism all day. We're rejected all the time. Bad news, your paper's not good enough, your grant's not good enough. Constantly working, to get promoted and trying to demonstrate our value and our worth. And so I thought, I just need to get thicker skin and I need to go someplace where someone's going to just all weekend tell me everything I do is bad. So that I'll be like, oh, you're making me think. I just looked it up. It's called Hanlon's razor. Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. Not that people are stupid when they leave our name off of an article, but the idea is that we the the grace and mercy to think that, wait a minute, they're not trying out to get me. It truly was and may have been an oopsie. So I think that kind of always the pause to me is, wait a minute, don't have the thin skin, take a breath, you know, let's kind of ask, tell me more about that. How did that happen? Be curious, dispassionately curious versus going into attack mode.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And criticism, you mentioned criticism. Criticism is so important, right? Because like I mentioned earlier that I had that feedback that was very difficult to hear from my direct supervisor. And I would never have believed that about myself, had he not said it.
Wow.
And so, but the reality is I had to accept that he obviously had seen some things that led him to make that conclusion. And if essentially he told me that I didn't value people, you know, or at least I didn't, not necessarily I didn't value people, I didn't value everyone, necessarily. And so
Wow.
basically I was selective in my, how much I valued others. Some people I was not seeing as valuable, at least in his eyes. And so I took that but like, if I didn't take that criticism and I was still sitting here today with the same flaws, because that was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago that I got that criticism, and and it's not, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm perfect in that respect, but I do believe I've made a lot of personal growth in that area, to where I really do try to, um, make sure I'm valuing everybody equally, make sure, I'm not letting any sort of injury or opinion, affect how I see others. You know,
Kudos to you, Neil, first of all, for taking that to heart and not being defensive. And kudos to the mentor or supervisor for the bravery and the courage to say what was probably very uncomfortable for him to point out to you. And the lesson you are underscoring is as we're preparing for official, formal, maybe leadership roles, or just even if we want to be great followers or leaders in our space at this moment in time, asking for the feedback. That honest request, help me. One thing can I do better? That takes courage for all of us. And so congrats to you all around for that self-awareness.
Well, you actually bring me to to my next nugget or whatever, because you mentioned it, seeking feedback, because what the reason I had to take that feedback is because I asked my supervisor. I said, what is an area that I need to improve in?
Wow.
Because I had listened to a podcast about the importance of craving feedback, and I asked for it, right? And so, of course, my initial response was, "Oh my gosh, Neil, you asked for this. That hurts, and you asked for it, But the reality is, you do need to crave that feedback, and you need to look for it, and you need to not take it personally. And when you have authority, uh, no one's going to want to give you that feedback. It's hard enough to get feedback when you don't have authority and you're a peer. When you have authority, people do not want to tell you,
bad
negative
things about
things.
yourself. Yeah.
That's right. And
Because you have
so,
power, because that's the power. And you said back to the hammer. It's the hammer of Thor. Grab Thor's hammer. You're going to get pummeled if
that's right.
people are afraid that you're going to use it against them. So you're right.
That's right. So if you don't learn to crave feedback and you don't learn to be a safe person to give feedback to, then that's going to hurt you when you do have authority, like you said. Anyway, I echo what you just said about, really seeking out that feedback, and no, it was not a fun experience, but I would never say that I'm absolutely glad that I did that, because ultimately it did help me get to where I want to be, which is I want to be somebody who equally values all of my coworkers and people, So anyway, and then another nugget and I believe this one's really crucial because I've seen where this has not gone well, is to learn to have difficult conversations. So, are you going to have to do that when you're in authority? Yes. But do you need to do that when you don't have authority? I would also say yes, because, just like that whole going, you mentioned it like when you're not taking things personally, you might have to have a conversation with somebody about, hey, why'd you say that in the meeting? Or why did you do this? Because that, I really didn't appreciate that. Like, learning to have those difficult conversations is so important. And I can't say nobody, but I am not aware of anybody who likes having those conversations. But if you don't have those conversations, you're creating a landmine that is going to blow up at some point. Either somebody's going to leave the organization, or it's, some sort of toxic environment is going to come out of it. And I can say that because I have seen it happen where difficult conversations were avoided. And I've been guilty of this too. You don't have a conversation, it's not going to be fun. And so, like,
you just hope it goes away. It'll go
that's
away.
right.
It'll go away.
That's right.
It'll solve itself. It'll cure itself.
That's right. That's right. So I have really tried to be somebody, like this is an area that I really want to continue growing in and getting better in and so like even like it's sort of this rule, this switch in my head that once I start having like a conflict with somebody, especially if it's over a text or email, I can tell something's, there's some emotion in there. I'm immediately like, okay, schedule a meeting or go find them. We're gonna go talk this out, And it's not because I want to have that conversation. It's just that
Nip
I'm
it in the bud.
that's I'm so afraid of the consequences if I don't have that conversation.
Oof.
And I don't want to be the reason that something blows up if I can help it, So I really, having, and I just, there's some really great books about this, but the tricky part of having difficult conversations is to be great at it, you really need a ton of skills that are not necessarily natural to all of us. And so I guess I would just say, as with any of this, right? I mean, nobody flips a switch and is suddenly a fantastic leader or a fantastic, person, right? It's all progress. So you have to take one step at a time, and there's a bunch of different sayings about that, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. My dad used to say something beats nothing, right? So do something. So I just think that sometimes it can be discouraging because you think you suddenly, especially once you get authority, you suddenly have to be good at all these things. And okay, yeah, sure, you wish you would have planted that tree 20 years ago, but you didn't. So now you got the second best time to plant that tree is right now. So, and it won't be an oak tree tomorrow. It'll be a little seedling, that you have to keep nurturing and working on until one day, you wake up and you're like, oh wow, like somebody gives you great, positive feedback. You know what, Neil, you are really good at having tough conversations. I'm like, oh wow, or somebody gives me feedback. You know what, Neil, I can tell how much you care about others. I can tell how much you value others.
Wow.
So you might get negative feedback one day, and one day you may get the exact opposite feedback if you keep working on it, one little piece at a time. So,
Oh my gosh. That is such an encouraging. I love I love your whole energy. I feel so motivated and so inspired. And Neil, this has been such a great conversation. I'd love to have you back on the podcast. Friends, this has been a great episode with Dr. Neil Duggar. Let's all do what Neil Duggar's dad said. Something beats nothing. Let's just do one thing, at least one thing. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for tuning in to the Faculty Factory podcast. We are a faculty development community sharing tools to build academic leaders in healthcare. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast? Please visit facultyfactory.org/contact and send me a message there. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Affairs at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas.